Hello, my name is Dr. Jeffrey Barsuk. I am a professor of medicine and medical education at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. I currently serve as the Director of Simulation and Patient Safety. I would like to welcome you back to the second podcast in our series on simulation and healthcare education. Today, we plan to highlight Chapter 3 on developing a mastery learning curriculum within our book called Comprehensive Healthcare Simulation, Mastery Learning, and Health Professions Education. Today, I have the distinct honor of interviewing Dr. David Salzman. David is an associate professor of emergency medicine and medical education. He also serves as director of simulation for undergraduate education. Dave, it's an absolute honor to interview you today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Dave, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got involved in simulation here at Northwestern?
When I was in medical school, I had my first exposure to simulation during several of our advanced clerkships. The hands-on learning really fit with my learning style. It was also about the same time that the use of simulation was really starting to expand, both into emergency medicine as well as many other specialties, both in residency and medical school training. When I got to residency, we had a few intermittent simulations, but it really wasn't a large component of our training. I think everyone at that time was still trying to figure out the best way to integrate scenarios and what type of procedures to teach and how to develop the best strategies for simulation-based teaching and learning. As my residency was ending, I was trying to decide what the next stage of my career would be, and Northwestern was building a brand new state-of-the-art simulation center. I decided to stay at Northwestern to complete a medical education fellowship with some advanced training to really learn the theoretical constructs behind education and apply those to simulation. Subsequently, I completed a master's of education degree. And now, Jeff, as you know, my main interest is in creating and implementing simulation-based curriculum for residents and medical students.
That reminds me, you were actually one of the first participants in some of the original central venous catheter insertion simulation-based mastery learning studies as a very young emergency medicine resident, weren't you?
Yeah, I remember that. That first experience as a learner really resonated with me. And I often reflect back on it as a curriculum developer. I think it's having those opportunities to experience the simulation from the side of a learner that have really helped me develop more impactful simulation-based curriculum of my own. It was really cool to be a part of that initial study showing that simulation can truly translate into improved patient outcomes, specifically surrounding central line insertion.
Well, Dave, the good thing is what happens in the sim lab stays in the sim lab. Although I don't even remember your performance that day, I'm sure it was quite great. In a different podcast, we talked about the wide variation and clinical skills that we see even among the expert performers, among attending physicians, and even among practicing nurses. And we talked to Dr. McGahey about simulation-based mastery learning as a potential solution to the problem of the wide variation in clinical skills. Our discussion today will be about how to develop a simulation-based mastery learning curriculum. When developing a simulation-based mastery learning curriculum, we often use the Thomas and Kern model for curriculum development as a foundation. Then we add key components of mastery learning, including skills practice using a technique called deliberate practice, and also requiring all learners to meet or exceed a minimum passing standard before training completion. David and I will address these pedagogies during our discussion. Dave, can you kind of take us through the Thomas and Kern model and how you think about it when you create a curricula?
Sure. As you know, Jeff, I'm a huge fan of the Thomas and Kern model. I really like it for its simplicity and organization. I think it's good for anyone developing a curriculum to have a stepwise approach they can follow. And while the Thomas and Kern method is one approach, it's not the only one. There are other ones out there too. To me, it's just the one that resonates in its simplicity and its organization, and that's why it's the one I like to use. In the Thomas and Kern approach, there's an explicit recognition that any decision made during the curriculum development process will impact all of the other steps along the way. And so as we go through the 6 steps that Thomas and Kern have described, I would hope that the listeners would keep in their mind that a decision made at one point will impact on all other decisions made later in the process, and potentially even impact on decisions that have already previously been made. This creates wonderful opportunities for revision, refinement, and improvement during the curriculum development process. So, the first step is the problem identification and general needs assessment. Every curriculum designer seeks to identify a specific healthcare need or problem that needs to be addressed. Perhaps it's a procedural competency, placement of a central line, or the resulting impact of not placing lines correctly, such as increased rates of central line-associated bloodstream infections. Other problems could be communication strategies or challenges with health inequities and disparities. The curriculum designer first has to define the problem before moving forward. Without a clear definition of this problem, there is no roadmap. Once we've identified the problem, we can then start to think about what is currently being done to tackle the problem. Consider what is the solution to the problem and how can we use education as a part of the strategy to improve this issue. We may need to create a new curriculum or perhaps augment what is already being taught. The second step of the Thomas and Kern model calls for a more targeted needs assessment. Here, the curriculum designer has to refine the curriculum based on the specific needs of their learners. So as an example, a curriculum focused on central line-associated bloodstream infections will likely be different if it's developed for the clinicians who are placing the line as compared to the clinicians who are responsible for the daily maintenance of the line to minimize ongoing infections. The curriculum designer also has to think about the local institution and environment and who the specific learners are and how it's all going to integrate into other components of their training and curriculum. So, Jeff, as you're reflecting on the needs assessment, both the general and the targeted needs assessment, are there other things that you think about in these 2 steps here?
Yeah, Dave, I really like to put my ear to the ground. I think it's really important that we know the skills or knowledge, competency requirements for residents, medical students, attending physicians, practicing nurses, or whoever the target learner is. But I like to ask the hospital leadership, in the case of our hospital, what are your biggest problems? And try to address both the general and targeted needs assessments within those problems. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a hospital. Could be a clinic, could be something like a nursing school or a medical school. The key thing is what is important to them. What are their biggest issues? Maybe they get feedback that at a nursing school, their students are not adequately trained in a particular area that they would like to focus on in the future. One example, though, of the helpfulness of a needs assessment is illustrated by our experience at our own institution. We began studying advanced cardiac life support in around 2003. There were several reasons for this. We knew that code blue events are infrequent, yet all of our 130 internal medicine residents at that time needed to be prepared to respond in these emergency situations. This was our general needs assessment. Simulation was a good fit for this quote unquote code leader training. And when we spoke to stakeholders, including nurses and residents, everyone agreed that additional practice would be really important in this area. Residents, for instance, pointed to the need to be familiar with equipment, such as the temporary pacemaking function of the defibrillator machine. Nurses pointed to the need for the code leader to communicate effectively throughout the code blue event. So this was really our targeted needs assessment. While all our residents were already clinically excellent and had completed an American Heart Association Advanced Cardiac Life Support class, the needs assessment showed that this was a good area for a new curriculum and we could still do better. Partnering with the stakeholders such as nurses was key to obtaining hospital funding for supplies. Over the years, we have added to our training based on ongoing feedback of our hospital nurses. These include training of rapid response nurses alongside medicine residents, as well as in situ code blue simulations that are unannounced, where we call code blue and everyone comes running to see a mannequin and runs a code.
Jeff, I really like that example. It highlights the importance of understanding the needs of all stakeholders of a potential curriculum, and also demonstrating how a curriculum can be modified over time as the needs continually change with your learners. So now that we've gone through this process of thinking about the problem from the big picture and then narrowing it down to our specific learners, the next part of curriculum development, step 3, is goals and objectives. Goals and objectives are critical. The goals serve as a broad overview of the curriculum and the skills which need to be accomplished, while the objectives are specific and measurable. Objectives can cover several different domains, including knowledge, attitudes, and skills that you hope the learner acquires. The objectives that are chosen have to be consistent with this specific need that you identified in step 1 and step 2. And as I alluded to earlier, every decision and refinement along each of the 6 steps will define and refine other following steps. When writing objectives, one needs to include 5 components. A well-written objective indicates who will do how much of what by when. The will do part of the objectives uses action verbs that can be measured. So for your ACLS curriculum that you just described, an example of an objective could be all 2nd and 3rd year internal medicine residents will optimally perform as an ACLS leader during cardiac arrests after simulation-based training. After the objectives are written and refined, revised, the curriculum designer next moves on to step 4 in the Thomas and Kern model, educational strategies. And there are a lot of educational strategies. This is both exciting and somewhat intimidating at the same time. You could use strategies including small group learning and lectures, working with standardized patients or simulators, task trainers, hybrid simulations. There's videos and flipping lectures, or just as we have done so often, having a conversation over Zoom. And I think the essential part of this and the key component is that the educational strategy picked must be consistent with the objectives of the curriculum. Building off our previous example, if the objective is to teach a clinician how to manage a patient in cardiac arrest using optimal ACLS, the educational strategy picked, or at least one of the educational strategies picked, must allow the learner to demonstrate these steps. It can't just be to watch a video and take a multiple choice test about this process. The educational strategies also allow the curriculum developer to be creative, to innovate new ways to teach, or to think about new models or approaches that may be better than what is currently being done. Step 5 is implementation. And Jeff, I'm definitely going to turn to you for your input on this, because I know we've had many conversations over the years about implementation strategies. And I personally find the implementation part to be one of the most challenging and exciting parts of the curriculum design process. Here, the designer gets to think about how to actually make the curriculum work. It's converting your idea, your theoretical construct that you've built with goals and objectives and educational strategies, into something that will actually happen. But in order to make it happen, the curriculum designer has to get the support, both financial, perhaps political, or institutional buy-in to ensure that the curriculum will progress as designed. Will there be money to support the time and equipment needed? Will the learners be able to get the protected time to attend the sessions? Where will the sessions occur and when will they occur? And how much time, especially in a mastery learning context, do we anticipate that we're going to need for all of the different components of the curriculum to ensure that our learners are able to meet that very high standard when we're finished? It's in thinking about these details and planning that the likelihood of success of the curriculum improves. And so, Jeff, I know we've had a lot of experience